Welcome to the Behind Story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a crazy story. Let's jump right in. The first time I saw her, she was already sitting in my chair. Not just any chair, my lounge chair, the one on my back patio, positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon sun. My hat, my book, and my sunscreen were scattered on the ground beside her, like discarded evidence of my own existence. And there she was, reclining like she had just discovered her own personal resort, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the sky, completely oblivious to the fact that she was in someone else's backyard. For a second, I thought I had lost my mind. Had I invited someone over and forgotten? Maybe a friend had stopped by for a swim? No, that didn't make sense. And then my eyes drifted to the figure splashing around in my pool, a kid, maybe 7 or 8, kicking up water like he was training for the Olympics. That's when my stomach dropped. She had brought her child. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping onto the patio. "What are you doing on my property?" The woman, blonde, tanned, and dressed in an expensive-looking swimsuit, turned her head lazily in my direction, as if I had interrupted something extremely important. She lifted her sunglasses onto her head and gave me a look I could only describe as mild irritation, like I was the one intruding. "Oh," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Is this your place?" I blinked. "Yes, it is." She nodded, as if that settled something, and then turned back to watch her son splash in my pool. "The lake was too cold," she explained, as if that answered every possible question. "Okay, but that doesn't explain why you're here," I said, feeling my patience unraveling like a loose thread. "On my property, in my pool," she sighed, exasperated. "Relax, it's just water, and it's a hot day. We're not hurting anything." My jaw tightened. "You're trespassing. You can't just walk onto someone's property and use their things." She pursed her lips and shook her head like I was some sort of unreasonable lunatic. "Wow. You really don't like sharing, huh? That's kinda sad." My blood pressure skyrocketed. "That's not the point. The point is, you don't belong here. I don't know you." She let out a long-suffering sigh and finally deigned to move. Not to leave, but to sit up, crossing one leg over the other, like we were having a casual chat at a coffee shop. "Listen," she said, her voice adopting that condescending tone people use when explaining something to a particularly slow child. "My son saw the pool, and he really wanted to swim. The lake was too cold, and, honestly, your pool was right there. So I figured, why not?" She figured, why not? I ran a hand down my face, trying to ground myself in reality, because this could not actually be happening. "Because it's not yours, that's why not. Now get your kid out of the pool and leave." She made a dramatic show of looking around. "You don't have a no trespassing sign." I stared at her. "Are you serious? Do I need a sign to tell people not to walk into my backyard and use my stuff?" She shrugged. "I mean, it would help." Oh, I was about to lose it. I turned to the kid, who was still happily flopping around in my pool like a sea lion. "Hey, buddy, you need to get out of there now." That was my mistake, because the second those words left my mouth, Karen erupted. "How dare you talk to my child that way?" She shrieked, leaping to her feet so fast her sunglasses tumbled off her head. "He's just a kid. He has feelings. What kind of heartless person kicks a child out of a pool on a hot day?" I took a step back, caught off guard by the sheer volume of her voice. "Lady, I am not heartless, but this is me home, not a public park. Your kid is not entitled to my pool." Her eyes narrowed. "You know, people like you really make me sick. So selfish. My son just wanted to swim, and instead of being a decent human being, you're making a huge deal out of nothing. What is wrong with you?" I could feel my pulse in my ears. I will call the police. Right now. Oh, go ahead, she sneered. I'll just tell them you threatened my child. Let's see who they believe. I opened my mouth, but she cut me off by stomping over to the pool. Come on, sweetie, she cooed to her son, loudly enough to make sure I heard every word. We're leaving. This mean man doesn't know how to be kind. But don't worry, Mommy will raise you better. I stood there, stunned, as she hauled her son out of the pool, grabbed her designer tote, and before leaving, kicked over my patio chair, like a final act of defiance. Then she marched off, flipping me off as she stormed through my yard, like she had been the one wronged. I stood in place, hands clenched into fists, watching her disappear down the sidewalk, steam practically pouring from my ears. Rusty, my dog, wandered over and let out a low growl in her direction. I know, boy, I muttered, rubbing his head. She's a menace. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. I should have known it wasn't over. People like her never just walk away. It started the next morning. I was sipping my coffee on the back porch, still fuming about yesterday's ridiculous encounter, when I heard something, a low hum, then the distinct squeak of a rusty wheel. I turned my head. There she was, Karen, marching up my driveway, pushing one of those collapsible wagons loaded with floaties, a cooler, and a massive beach umbrella. And behind her, her kid clutching an inflatable shark, as if he were about to embark on a grand aquatic adventure. My coffee nearly slipped from my fingers. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, I muttered, setting my mug down before I ended up throwing it. Karen stopped at the edge of my property, looked me dead in the eye, and get this, waved. Good morning, she called, like we were friendly neighbors and not two people who had a heated argument about her illegally using my pool just the day before. I didn't respond, just folded my arms and waited. She took that as an invitation to keep talking. So I thought about what you said yesterday, she continued, her voice dripping with fake cheer. And I totally get it. You don't like unexpected guests, which is, understandable. I mean, boundaries, right? She laughed, as if she hadn't trampled all over mine not even 24 hours ago. Glad we're on the same page? I said flatly. Now turn around and leave. She blinked, like she hadn't heard me. Oh, no, no, no. See, I figured out a solution. Since my son loves your pool so much, and you're obviously not using it all the time, I thought, why not share? Excuse me? Oh, don't worry, she rushed to explain. We'll only come by on certain days. I made a schedule. She pulled a laminated sheet from her tote bag, laminated, and held it up proudly. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. Just a couple of hours. Nothing crazy. And if you're ever not home, don't worry. I'll make sure the gate stays closed when we leave. She said this like she was doing me a favor. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity radiating off of her like a nuclear reactor about to melt down. You scheduled time to trespass on my property? She laughed, like I had just made a joke. It's not trespassing if you know about it. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to hold on to the last shreds of my sanity. It is, exactly, trespassing. Karen, you are not allowed on my property. Not yesterday, not today, not on your delusional little schedule. Never. The fake cheer drained from her face, replaced by an indignant pout. Well, that's just selfish, she huffed. You have all this space, and you're not even using it half the time. Meanwhile, my poor son has to suffer because we don't have a pool. You have no idea what it's like raising a child in this heat. Then, buy a pool, I snapped, or go to a community center, or the public pool, or literally way anywhere that isn't my backyard. Wow, she sneered, crossing her arms. So, this is what's wrong with society. No community spirit. Everyone's just so greedy these days. I took a deep breath, counted to 5, and reminded myself that prison wasn't worth it. Karen, I said, my voice dangerously calm, if you don't leave right now, I will call the cops. She let out a bark of laughter. Oh, please. Like they're going to care about some kid swimming. Go ahead, call them. I dare you. And so I did. I pulled out my phone, keeping my eyes locked on her as I dialed. She stared at me, the confidence in her smirk wavering ever so slightly as the line connected. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, hi. I've got a woman trespassing on my property, refusing to leave after being warned multiple times. Karen's face paled. Are they being aggressive? Verbally, yes. And they're trying to claim my property as some kind of public pool. The operator assured me officers were on their way. I hung up, crossing my arms, as Karen's bravado cracked like cheap glass. You actually called? She stammered, her voice pitching up. You dared me to, she scoffed, trying to regain control. This is what's so ridiculous. You're acting like I'm some criminal. You are a criminal. It's called trespassing. Her kid, who up until now had been busy playing with his inflatable shark, finally spoke up. Mom, can we just go? Karen's face twisted, caught between saving face and acknowledging defeat. She scoffed, yanked her wagon around, and stormed off down my driveway, dragging the kid behind her. This isn't over, she hissed over her shoulder. You haven't heard the last of me. Oh, I had no doubt about that. 5 minutes later, the cops arrived. I explained the situation. They took a report, and I made it very clear that if she came back, I wanted her charged. They nodded, gave me their card, and left. For the rest of the day, I kept checking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then that night, it did. At 11:45 p.m., my security cameras pinged me with an alert. I opened the app, and there, creeping through my yard under the cover of darkness, was Karen, holding bolt cutters. I froze. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Karen, full-grown, fully unhinged Karen, standing in my yard at nearly midnight, gripping a pair of bolt cutters, like she was auditioning for a low-budget heist movie. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stared at the grainy black and white feed on my phone screen. She was cutting my lock. This woman who had screamed at me about community spirit, who had scheduled time to trespass on my property, who had dared me to call the cops, was now breaking and entering. I shot up from my bed so fast that Rusty, curled up at the foot of it, let out a startled growl. I know, buddy, I muttered, yanking on a hoodie and grabbing my keys. She's lost her damn mind. I didn't call the cops yet. I should have. A rational person would have, but I was so utterly stunned, so furious, that I needed to see this lunatic with my own 2 eyes. I stormed downstairs, flipping on every porch light as I threw open the back door. And there she was, caught red-handed. She flinched at the sudden flood of light, but quickly recovered, straightening her spine like she was the one with the moral high ground. Oh, for God's sake, she snapped, as if I were the inconvenience. You really need a better lock. This one is so flimsy. I stared at her, my eye twitching. What the actual hell do you think you're doing? She huffed and rolled her eyes, like I had just asked why the sky was blue. Well, obviously, I'm letting my son swim. You left me no choice. No choice. You were being completely unreasonable earlier, she accused, waving the bolt cutters in my direction. I tried to compromise. I tried to be civil, but knew you had to go and be a selfish, greedy stop. Right there. My voice dropped, low and steady, the kind of tone that makes dogs whimper and smart people back away. You are trespassing on my property again. but this time with tools to break in. That's not just trespassing, Karen. That's a felony. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a malfunctioning fish. Oh, don't be so dramatic. I wasn't stealing anything. You were cutting my lock because you wouldn't just let us in, she shrieked, throwing up her hands. God, you act like you're some kind of king sitting on a gold mine. It's a pool. Water is for everyone. Rusty let out a deep, rumbling growl from behind me. Good boy, get off my property. Now, my hands clenched into fists, or I will call the cops. And this time I'll make sure they arrest you. Her expression twisted, ugly, and spiteful. I'll just tell them you threatened me. I lifted my phone. I have been recording this entire conversation. Karen paled. It was almost satisfying almost to watch the gears in her entitled little brain screech to a halt. To see her process, in real time, just how deep a hole she'd dug for herself. She swallowed. You wouldn't try me. Her grip on the bolt cutters tightened for a second like she was actually considering swinging them at me. But then she exhaled sharply, spun on her heel, and stomped away like a child denied candy at a checkout aisle. I watched her go, making sure she actually left my property before locking the gate again, this time with a new padlock, the heavy-duty kind they use at storage facilities. Then I called the cops. By the time the officers arrived, Karen had made it back to her house, but I had the whole thing on video. Jesus, one of the officers muttered as he watched the footage. You weren't kidding about her being persistent. She tried to schedule designated trespassing days earlier, I said dryly. This is escalation. They agreed. They went over to her house. I don't know exactly how that conversation went, but I do know she screamed a lot. I heard something about police brutality, and this is a free country, followed by the glorious sound of handcuffs clicking into place, trespassing, attempted breaking and entering. Property damage. They took her away screaming. I slept like a baby that night. The next morning, I got a knock on my door. It was a man, maybe early 40s, looking exhausted. Hi, he sighed, rubbing his temples. I'm Greg, Karen's husband. Oh, this was gonna be good. Is she still in jail? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He groaned. No, she posted bail, which means I'm here too. He exhaled through his nose. Apologize. I raised an eyebrow. Apologize? Look, man, he said, dragging a hand through his hair. I swear to you, I did not know she was doing any of this. I work 12-hour shifts. I come home, eat, and pass out. I knew she was mad about the pool thing, but I thought she was just venting. I crossed my arms. You really expect me to believe you had no idea your wife was cutting my lock to break into my yard? He flinched. He hesitated. Okay, I heard her muttering something about it last night, but I assumed she was just being dramatic. She's dramatic. Oh, I noticed. He sighed again. Look, man, I don't expect you to forgive her. I wouldn't. But she's facing charges now, and trust me, she needs to learn a lesson. So, I just wanted to say, I appreciate you pressing charges, because maybe, just maybe, she'll finally understand that the world doesn't revolve around her. I studied him for a moment. He looked defeated. Then I shrugged. We'll see. Greg nodded, like that was the best answer he was going to get, and walked away. As I shut the door, Rusty wagged his tail beside me. What do you think, buddy? I asked, scratching behind his ears. You think she learned anything? Rusty huffed. Yeah, me neither. I should have known Karen wouldn't stay gone for long. People like her don't learn lessons. They plot revenge. For a couple of days, things were quiet. Too quiet. I kept checking my security cameras, half expecting to see her sneaking around my yard again, but she was nowhere to be found. Maybe her brief stint in jail had finally scared some sense into her. Or maybe she was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Turns out it was the latter. On the third morning after her arrest, I woke up to a pounding on my front door. Not a polite knock, not even an impatient ring of the doorbell. No, this was the kind of pounding that screamed anger. Rusty was already at the door, growling low in his throat. "Easy, boy," I muttered, pulling on a hoodie as I checked the peephole. Karen. She stood there, arms crossed, lips twisted into an expression that could have curdled milk. But this time, she wasn't alone. Next to her was a man in a cheap suit, holding a leather briefcase. Oh, this just got interesting. I opened the door just enough to lean against the frame. "You're lucky I don't have a no Karens allowed sign. What do you want?" Karen scoffed, then gestured to the man beside her. "This is my lawyer. And we're here because I'm suing you." I blinked. Then I laughed. A full, genuine, "I can't believe how stupid you are," laugh. "You're suing me?" I wiped a tear from my eye. Oh, this I have to hear. Her so-called lawyer, who looked more like a guy who'd advertise on late-night TV, cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, my client is suing for emotional distress, defamation, and unlawful harassment. She has suffered greatly due to your actions." I raised an eyebrow. "My actions?" "That's right." Karen snapped, stepping forward. "Ever since you," she air-quoted, "had me arrested, my life has been ruined. People in the neighborhood whisper about me. My husband is furious. My HOA position is under review. And my poor son is traumatized." Rusty let out a loud bark, and I had to place a hand on his collar to keep him from lunging. "Oh no," I said dryly, "not your precious HOA seat. However will you live?" Karen's eyes blazed with fury. "You think this is funny? You think you can just destroy my reputation and get away with it? You humiliated me, had me thrown in jail, and now everyone thinks I'm the bad guy." "Karen," I cut in, voice calm. "You are the bad guy." Her mouth snapped shut, her face flushing red. I turned to the lawyer. "I have security footage of her breaking into my property, attempting to cut my lock, and verbally admitting she was trespassing. If this goes to court, all she's going to get is more legal fees." The lawyer hesitated, suddenly not so sure of himself. "Well, that is, something to consider, but..." Karen shoved her way in front of him. "No, you listen to me. I don't care about your stupid videos. You ruined my life, and I'm going to ruin yours. If you don't want this lawsuit, I have a counteroffer." I sighed. Oh, this should be good. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for the most ridiculous demand yet. "I want you to publicly apologize to me on video and admit that you overreacted, that you set me up and had me arrested out of spite." I stared at her. "And," she continued, looking smug, "you will let me and my son use your pool whenever we want. No restrictions, no complaints, no petty rules." I had to bite my cheek to stop myself from bursting out laughing again. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Karen, do you know what defamation actually means?" She blinked. "Excuse me? It means making false statements that harm someone's reputation. Everything I've said about you is true. I have evidence to back it up. If anyone's getting sued for defamation, it's you." I smiled. "And emotional distress? That's adorable. Maybe I should sue you for that, considering you showed up at my house again like some kind of insane stalker." Karen's smug expression faltered. I turned to the lawyer. "You really want to take this to court? Because if you do, I will countersue for harassment, attempted B&E, and trespassing. And I will win." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Miss S. Johnson, perhaps we should." "No," Karen screeched. "He's lying. This is All his fault? I deserve compensation for what he did to me. I smirked. Well, if you're so confident, let's do this. I'd love to see you explain to a judge why you thought cutting my lock was community spirit. Karen opened her mouth, then shut it. Her lawyer cleared his throat again. I think perhaps we should, reconsider this lawsuit. Karen's face went from red to pale. Wait, what? No, we CANT. I deserve, Miss S. Johnson, the lawyer cut in, voice strained. If Mr. Reynolds has security footage, this could backfire severely. You could face more charges. She whirled back to me, fists clenched. You think you've won? This isn't over, Karen. It's so over, I said, stepping back inside. Now get off my property before I call the cops. Again. Her mouth opened and closed, but her lawyer was already tugging her toward the sidewalk, mumbling something about risk factors. She had lost. She knew it. As they finally walked away, Rusty sat beside me, his tail thumping against the floor. I ruffled his fur. Think she got the message this time? Rusty huffed. Yeah, me neither. I should have known Karen wouldn't take defeat gracefully. People like her never do. For a week after her failed lawsuit stunt, things were eerily quiet. No late-night break-ins, no unhinged yelling from the sidewalk, no laminated trespassing schedules shoved under my door. It was almost peaceful, which, of course, meant she was planning something. And then, on Saturday morning, I woke up to sirens. I groggily stumbled out of bed, Rusty already barking his head off downstairs. My phone was lighting up with notifications from my security system. I swiped it open, expecting to see Karen lurking around again. Instead, I saw fire trucks. My stomach dropped. I bolted for the front door and threw it open, stepping straight into chaos. 3 fire trucks, a police cruiser, and a growing crowd of my neighbors stood at the edge of my driveway. A few firefighters were walking around my property, looking as confused as I felt. And standing smack in the middle of the commotion, talking animatedly to an officer, was Karen, dressed in a bathrobe, holding a coffee cup. Looking smug, I marched straight toward them. What the hell is going on? Karen turned, feigning surprise. Oh, you're finally up. I ignored the white-hot rage bubbling inside me and looked at the officer. Why are there fire trucks in front of my house? The officer sighed. Sir, we received a call about a fire emergency at this address. I blinked. A fire emergency? There's no fire. Well, I saw one, Karen interrupted, crossing her arms. I was on my morning walk when I saw huge plumes of smoke coming from your backyard. Naturally, as a concerned citizen, I called it in. I turned to the firefighters, who were looking around my property with growing irritation. One of them radioed back to his team. Yeah, we're not seeing anything here. No signs of smoke or fire. Karen gasped dramatically. Well, it was there. Maybe he put it out before you arrived. I let out a slow, measured breath, clenching my fists to keep myself from strangling this woman in front of a crowd of witnesses. So, let me get this straight. You saw imaginary smoke, called the fire department, and now I have 3 trucks in front of my house for no reason. It wasn't imaginary, she snapped. I know what I saw, and quite frankly, I'm concerned about what you might be doing back there. Are you burning garbage? Running an illegal bonfire? Endangering the community? I stared at her. Karen, I have a pool, a giant body of water. What exactly do you think I'm setting on fire? The firefighter nearest to me let out a quiet chuckle before quickly composing himself. The officer, meanwhile, pinched the bridge of his nose. Sir, we need to be thorough. Do you mind if we check your backyard? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Go ahead. But there's nothing there. I led them around back, where, shockingly, there was no inferno raging, just my perfectly intact property, my very non-burning pool, and Rusty sitting by the patio, looking at us like he was tired of human nonsense. The lead firefighter muttered something under his breath and spoke into his radio. All clear. False alarm. Karen followed us into the backyard, still clinging to her act. Well, that doesn't prove anything. Maybe he did something suspicious before we arrived. You should check for flammable materials. The officer turned to me. Sir, do you have any reason to believe she made this report in bad faith? I gestured at Karen, who was literally standing in my backyard in a bathrobe, shrieking conspiracy theories about my non-existent fire. Oh, I don't know. Maybe. The officer nodded, then turned to Karen. MAAM, we're going to need to have a word. Karen's eyes widened. Me? But Hayes the one hiding something. The officer pulled out his notepad. We take false emergency reports very seriously. And considering you've already been warned about trespassing, I wasn't trespassing. I was saving lives. Ma'am, step outside the property now. She huffed, but finally, stomped back toward the front yard. I followed, watching as the officers continued questioning her. Then came the best part. Since this was a false report, the officer continued, you will be issued a citation and, depending on further investigation, possible fines for wasting emergency services time. Karen's jaw dropped. What? You can't fine me. I was being a good neighbor. The officer ignored her and wrote the citation anyway, tearing off the top sheet and handing it to her. If this happens again, ma'am, you could be charged. Do you understand? Karen made a strangled noise somewhere between a shriek and a sob. This is ridiculous. Ma'am, if you continue raising your voice, we can escalate this. That shut her up. For now, the firefighters started packing up, shaking their heads as they climbed back into their trucks. I turned to one of them, offering an apologetic shrug. Sorry for the waste of time. The guy grinned. Don't be. This is the funniest call we've had all month. Karen stood there, gripping the citation so tightly her fingers turned white. She turned to me, her face red with fury. You did this, she hissed. You made me look like an idiot, I smirked. Karen, you did that all by yourself. Her eyes blazed. This isn't over, I snorted. You keep saying that, but, it keeps being over. She let out an incoherent shriek before storming off down the sidewalk, bathrobe flapping dramatically behind her. I watched her go, shaking my head before heading back inside. Rusty wagged his tail, looking up at me expectantly. Yeah, buddy, I sighed, scratching behind his ears. I don't think she's done either. Rusty huffed, and sure enough, I was right. The thing about people like Karen is that they don't just lose. They plot, they fester, they sit in their overpriced suburban homes, stewing in their own entitlement, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. I should have known she wasn't finished. The morning after the fire department fiasco, I stepped outside to grab my mail and found something taped to my front gate. A cease and desist letter. I blinked at it, then read the absurd words aloud. By order of the HOA, I stopped, immediately groaning. Oh, for the love of Karen. It was obviously Karen, even though she'd been hit with a fine for wasting emergency services time, even though she had already lost a lawsuit. She was still trying. And now, she was dragging the HOA into it. I ripped the letter down and stormed back inside, flipping through the nonsense accusations, property violations, public nuisance, uncooperative neighbor. Uncooperative neighbor? I scoffed, shaking my head. Oh, I'm sorry for not letting a lunatic break into my yard and use my pool like it's a community splash pad. My mistake. I should have ignored it. I really should have. But I was done letting Karen think she had any power over me. So I did something that should have ended it once and for all. I went to the HOA meeting. Walking into that meeting felt like stepping onto enemy territory. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I took a seat at the long table, surrounded by the self-important faces of the HOA board. And there, at the head of the table, looking entirely too smug for someone who had repeatedly embarrassed herself, sat Karen. She smirked when she saw me. "Oh, how nice of you to finally join us, Jack." I leaned back in my chair. I figured I should see what kind of circus this was going to be in person. Karen's smirk faltered for half a second, but she quickly recovered. She cleared her throat and straightened a stack of papers, tapping them against the table like she was some kind of high-powered attorney and not just a professional neighborhood menace. "We are here today to discuss the numerous complaints filed against Mr. Reynolds regarding his failure to comply with HOA regulations," she began, her voice dripping with fake professionalism. I raised a hand. "Quick question before you continue. When did I join the HOA?" Karen blinked. "What?" "You keep throwing the word compliance around," I said, leaning forward, "but I don't recall ever signing anything that made me a part of this little regime." Karen's face twitched. "Well, actually, your property was annexed into the HOA's jurisdiction without my permission," I interrupted. "Which, I'm sure you conveniently forgot, is completely illegal." A couple of the board members exchanged glances. Karen, however, pressed on, undeterred by things like logic and facts. "Regardless," she snapped, "your behavior has been unacceptable. You have been openly hostile toward your fellow neighbors." "You mean you?" I asked, "because as far as I can tell, no one else in this neighborhood has tried to break into my property or fake a fire emergency." More exchanged glances. A few nervous throat clears. One guy in the back coughed to hide a laugh. Karen's face turned. "You're disrupting the harmony of this community," she screeched. "You refuse to follow regulations. Your pool, my pool," I corrected, "is a nuisance to this neighborhood. You have refused to grant access despite repeated requests, and you have humiliated me in front of my peers." I tilted my head. "You humiliated yourself, Karen." Repeatedly. She slammed her hand on the table. "I am calling for a formal vote to enforce disciplinary action against Jack Reynolds." Silence. Karen turned to the board expectantly. "Well?" The board members shifted uncomfortably. The president, an older woman who had been rubbing her temples for the past 5 minutes, finally spoke up. "Karen," she sighed, "we can't enforce anything against Mr. Reynolds. He's right. His property isn't legally under the HOA's jurisdiction." Karen paled. But the annexation was illegal," the president interrupted, her patience clearly wearing thin, "which means any fines, complaints, or demands are completely unenforceable. And honestly, after reviewing everything that's happened, including the attempted break-in, the false emergency call, and the previous lawsuit," she turned to me, offering a small, apologetic nod. "Mr. Reynolds, you are officially exempt from any and all HOA regulations, effective immediately." Karen screeched. "You can't do that," she shrieked. "He's ruining everything." "You're all just going to let him?" One of the board members, the same guy who had coughed earlier, shrugged. "Honestly, Karen, we're all kind of sick of your crap." The room erupted in murmurs. A few nods. Some reluctant agreements. Karen looked around, her eyes wide with betrayal. You can't do this." The president sighed. "This meeting is adjourned." And just like that, it was over. Karen stormed out in a woe-blind rage, knocking over a chair in her path. I watched her go, shaking my head as I gathered my things. A few board members actually apologized to me on the way out. One even offered to buy me a drink as an apology for letting things go this far. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. For the first time in months, I walked home feeling free. No more HOA threats. No more ridiculous fines. No more entitled nonsense. But deep down, I knew This wasn't over. Not yet.